The dust cloud rose like a wall of death on the horizon, and Lucas Sterling knew in his gut that everyone on the northern range was about to die unless someone performed a miracle in the next 3 minutes. He had been riding fence line for the Triple Crown Ranch since dawn, the Arizona sun beating down merciless on his shoulders even though it was only April of 1887. The winter had been mild, which meant the cattle were restless and ornery. And now, as he watched that roiling mass of beef and terror thundering toward the canyon passage where the ranch hands had gathered for the midday meal, Lucas felt his heart drop into his boots. A stampede was nature's way of reminding men they were not as powerful as they believed, and this one looked like it had been touched off by something fierce. Maybe a rattler, maybe a cougar, maybe just the devil's own mischief. Whatever the cause, 2,000 head of cattle were barreling straight toward the narrow canyon where at least 15 men sat eating beans and hardtack, completely unaware. Lucas spurred his mare into a dead run, knowing even as he did that he would never make it in time. The distance was too great, the cattle too fast, and his warning shouts were swallowed by wind and distance. He was still a quarter-mile out when he saw her. The woman stood at the canyon entrance like she had grown there, planted firm as an old oak tree. She wore a simple brown riding skirt and a white blouse that caught the sunlight, her dark hair tied back in a braid that hung down past her shoulders. Lucas had never seen her before in his life, which was strange because he knew every soul within 50 miles of Coolidge, Arizona. But there she was, and instead of running like any sensible person would, she walked directly toward the oncoming wall of cattle and dust. He opened his mouth to scream at her to move, but the sound died in his throat as he watched what happened next. She raised both hands, palms out, and began to sing. Lucas could not hear the words at first over the thunder of hooves and his own horse's labored breathing, but he saw the effect ripple through the herd like wind across water. The lead steers, massive longhorns with spreads wide as a man was tall, began to slow. Not stop, not yet, but their wild-eyed panic seemed to ease just a fraction. The woman kept walking forward, kept her hands raised steady as stone, and kept singing in a voice that must have been something powerful because those cattle were listening. By the time Lucas reached the canyon entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs, the stampede had broken into confused clusters of milling cattle. The woman stood in the center of what should have been certain death, still singing, still moving her hands in slow, deliberate gestures that seemed to speak a language the animals understood better than any words. Steers that moments ago had been wild with terror now stood breathing hard, their sides heaving but calm, watching her, listening. Lucas pulled his mare to a stop and simply stared. The woman's voice was not particularly loud, but it carried a quality he had never heard before. Rich and deep and steady as bedrock, it wove through the air like a physical thing, wrapping around the cattle and soothing away their panic. She sang something that sounded like a lullaby, wordless and ancient, and her hands moved in patterns that drew the eye and held it. The steers closest to her had their ears forward, actually leaning toward her like children seeking comfort from their mother. Behind Lucas, he heard the ranch hands emerging from the canyon, their voices raised in confusion and wonder. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else cursed in pure astonishment. But Lucas could not tear his eyes away from the woman as she gradually brought 2,000 head of spooked cattle back from the edge of chaos with nothing but her voice and those steady, steady hands. It took another 10 minutes before the last of the cattle settled, and by then the woman's face was sheened with sweat and her voice had grown softer, but no less powerful. She lowered her hands slowly, like she was gentling a skittish horse, and the cattle simply stood there, docile as milk cows, breathing hard but no longer panicked. The silence that followed was so profound Lucas could hear his own heartbeat. The woman turned then, and her eyes met his across 30 yards of dust-choked air. They were gray as storm clouds, set in a face that was more striking than beautiful, all strong lines and determined jaw. She looked tired but satisfied, and when she smiled, it was just a small quirk of her lips, like she had done nothing more remarkable than bake a decent loaf of bread. Lucas dismounted without quite meaning to, his legs carrying him toward her before his brain caught up. Around him, the other ranch hands were starting to move, to speak, to react, but he barely heard them. All his attention was focused on this woman who had just done the impossible. "Who are you?" he asked when he got close enough, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Nora Osborne," she said, and her speaking voice had the same rich quality as her singing, though now he could hear the exhaustion threading through it. "I was traveling to Coolidge when I saw the dust cloud. Figured someone might be in trouble." "In trouble?" Lucas repeated, and a laugh escaped him that was half shock, half awe. "Madam, you just stopped a stampede with your bare hands. I have been working cattle my whole life, and I have never seen anything like that." "Not my bare hands," Nora corrected, flexing her fingers like they ached. "My voice and my hands. There is a difference." One of the other ranch hands, a weathered old-timer named Pete Collins, pushed forward with his hat clutched to his chest like he was in church. "Miss, you saved our lives." That whole herd was about to come through that canyon like a freight train. We would have been trampled into paste. Nora nodded, accepting this as simple fact rather than praise. "I am glad I arrived when I did then. Is there water nearby? I am quite thirsty." The practical request snapped Lucas out of his daze. "Of course, yes, come back to the canyon. We have canteens, food too if you are hungry. It is the least we can offer after what you just did." As he led her back toward where the other men waited, Lucas found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. She walked with a confidence that spoke of someone accustomed to wild places and difficult situations, her stride long and sure despite her skirts. Up close, he could see dust coating her clothes and a few scratches on her hands that must have come from hard traveling. She was not young, he realized, probably close to his own 26 years, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she smiled often. The ranch hands parted like the Red Sea as they approached, every man staring at Nora with expressions ranging from wonder to outright reverence. Pete thrust a canteen into her hands and she drank deeply, water spilling over her chin in a way that was completely unself-conscious. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and smiled. "Thank you," she said simply. "Where did you learn to do that?" Lucas asked, unable to contain the question burning through him. "I have heard of horse whisperers and such, but cattle," Nora's expression grew thoughtful. "My father raised cattle in Montana Territory, up near the Yellowstone River. We had big herds, thousands of head, and stampedes were a constant danger. My mother was Crow, and she taught me the old songs, the ways of speaking to animals that her people had used for generations. When I was 12, we had a stampede that killed 3 men, and I decided I would learn how to stop such things if I could. I have been practicing ever since." The casual way she said it, like learning to stop stampedes was no more remarkable than learning to sew, made Lucas shake his head in amazement. "You are traveling alone." "I am," Nora confirmed, and something in her tone suggested she would brook no argument on the subject. "I am on my way to Coolidge to take a position as a schoolteacher. The town council hired me by post after their previous teacher left rather suddenly." "Mrs. Henderson," Pete supplied helpfully. "She ran off with a traveling preacher back in February, caused quite the scandal." Nora's lips twitched with amusement. Well, I promise to be less scandalous. Teaching is rather more important to me than romance. The words should have been reassuring, but Lucas felt an odd twist of disappointment in his chest that he did not examine too closely. Instead, he focused on practical matters. Coolidge is another 8 miles south. If you were heading there when you saw the Stampede, you went considerably out of your way. Saving lives seemed worth the detour, Nora said dryly. But yes, I would appreciate directions to get back on the correct path, and perhaps someone could tell me what I might expect from Coolidge. The town council's letters were rather sparse on details. Lucas found himself speaking before he quite meant to. I live in Coolidge. I work for the Triple Crown, which is the largest ranch in the area, but my house is in town. I would be happy to escort you the rest of the way, show you around, introduce you to people. Pete shot him a knowing look that Lucas studiously ignored. Nora, for her part, studied him with those storm-gray eyes for a long moment before nodding. That would be kind of you, Mr. Sterling. Lucas Sterling. Mr. Sterling, she repeated, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. I accept your offer, provided it is not too much trouble. No trouble at all, Lucas assured her, and meant it completely. They gathered Nora's horse, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes, from where she had left it hobbled a quarter-mile back, and set out toward Coolidge as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon. The other ranch hands stayed behind to settle the cattle fully and make sure none had injured themselves during the chaos, but Pete gave Lucas a gap-toothed grin and a wink as they departed that made Lucas want to box the old man's ears. For the first mile, they rode in companionable silence. Lucas kept sneaking glances at Nora, trying to reconcile this calm, practical woman with the force of nature he had watched command 2,000 head of stampeding cattle. She sat her horse like she had been born in the saddle, relaxed but alert, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape around them. You are staring, Nora said without looking at him, amusement coloring her words. Lucas felt heat crawl up his neck. Sorry. I am just trying to wrap my mind around what I saw back there. It does not seem real. I assure you it was quite real. My throat is raw from singing and my arms ache from holding them up so long. She rolled her shoulders as if to emphasize the point. But I understand your meaning. I suppose it must have looked rather dramatic from the outside. Dramatic, Lucas repeated and laughed. Miss Osborne, you walked into certain death and turned it into a Sunday social. Dramatic does not begin to cover it. Nora was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its lightness. My father died in a stampede when I was 19. He was trying to turn the herd, doing everything right, and his horse stumbled. It was over in seconds. I was there, I saw it happen, and I could not do anything to stop it. She paused, her jaw tightening. After that, I dedicated myself to truly mastering what my mother had taught me. I never wanted to feel that helpless again. The raw honesty in her words hit Lucas like a physical blow. He understood that kind of loss, that kind of driving need to take control of an uncontrollable world. I am sorry, he said quietly. Losing a parent that way, it leaves a mark. It does, Nora agreed, but it also gave me purpose. I travel from ranch to ranch sometimes, teaching people what I know about calming cattle, about reading their behavior before panic sets in. The teaching position in Coolidge is a change for me, a chance to settle somewhere for a while, but I do not regret the years I spent learning this skill. Lucas nodded, understanding clicking into place. That is why you were not surprised by your own success back there. You have done this before. Many times, though not always with such a large herd. That was probably the biggest stampede I have faced. She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her whole face. I admit, my knees were shaking rather badly for the first minute or so. The idea that she had been afraid, that she had felt fear and done the impossible thing anyway, made Lucas admire her even more. You could not tell. You looked steady as granite. That is the secret, Nora confided. The cattle respond to confidence and calm. If I had let them see my fear, they would have fed on it and the panic would have spread. So I showed them what I wanted them to feel, and eventually they believed it. They talked as they rode, the conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Lucas told her about Coolidge, about the town's brief history as a railway stop that had grown into a proper community of nearly 200 souls. He described the schoolhouse, a sturdy adobe building on the south end of town, and the boarding house run by Mrs. Martha Chen, where Nora would likely stay until she found more permanent lodgings. He told her about the general store and the saloon and the church, with its enthusiastic but tone-deaf minister. In turn, Nora told him about Montana, about the vast herds and the bitter winters, and the way the light looked on the mountains at dawn. She spoke of her mother's people, the Crow, and the summers she had spent on the reservation learning their ways before her mother died when Nora was 16. She told him about the schools she had taught at before, temporary positions in rough mining camps and small ranching communities, always moving, never quite settling. "Why Coolidge?" Lucas asked as the town came into view, its low adobe buildings glowing golden in the late afternoon sun. "There are larger towns, more established schools. Why here?" Nora was quiet for a moment, considering. "Honestly, the letter from your town council felt different. Most places they ask about my credentials, my experience, my references. Mrs. Abernathy, your council head, she asked about my philosophy of education, and what I believed children needed most to thrive. It made me think Coolidge might be a place where I could do real good, not just teach reading and arithmetic. Mrs. Abernathy is a force of nature in her own right," Lucas said with affection. "Lost her husband to cholera 10 years back and raised 4 children alone while serving on the town council and running the dry goods store. She does not settle for mediocrity in anything." "Then I shall endeavor not to disappoint her," Nora said. They rode into Coolidge as the sun touched the horizon, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. People stopped what they were doing to stare as they passed, drawn by the sight of a stranger being escorted by Lucas Sterling. Coolidge was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Lucas knew that by tomorrow morning, half a dozen wildly inaccurate stories about Nora's arrival would be circulating. He led her directly to the boarding house, a well-maintained 2-story building with a wide front porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Chen, a formidable Chinese woman in her 50s who had come to Arizona with the railroad crews and stayed to build a life, met them at the door with her arms crossed and one eyebrow raised. "Lucas Sterling, who is this and why are you bringing her to my door at supper time, Mrs. Chen? This is Miss Nora Osborne, the new schoolteacher. Miss Osborne, this is Mrs. Martha Chen, who runs the finest boarding house in the territory and makes biscuits that will make you weep with joy." Martha's stern expression softened immediately. "The new teacher. We have been expecting you, though not until next week. Come in, come in. You look exhausted, child. When did you last eat a proper meal?" Nora dismounted, and Lucas saw her legs wobble slightly before she steadied herself. The day had clearly taken more out of her than she wanted to show. "Yesterday morning, I believe. I have been traveling hard." "Well, that stops now. Lucas, take her horse to the stable and tell Henry to give it a good rub-down and extra oats. Miss Osborne, you come with me. I have a room ready for you and a hot meal in 10 minutes. Lucas did as he was told, leading both horses to the small stable behind the boarding house, where Henry, Martha's nephew, took over with practiced efficiency. By the time Lucas returned to the boarding house, Nora had been installed at a table in the dining room with a plate piled high with roast chicken, potatoes, beans, and those famous biscuits. Martha stood over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate. "Thank you for your help today, Mr. Sterling," Nora said between bites, her manners clearly fighting with her hunger. "I am in your debt." "I think it is the entire Triple Crown crew who are in your debt," Lucas corrected. "What you did today saved lives, Miss Osborne. That is not a small thing." Martha's sharp eyes moved between them. "What happened today?" Lucas told the story, with Nora occasionally interjecting quiet corrections or downplaying her own role. By the end, Martha was staring at Nora with the same awed expression the ranch hands had worn. "You stopped a stampede with singing," Martha said slowly, "and hand movements. And a great deal of luck," Nora added. "It was not as miraculous as Mr. Sterling makes it sound." "It absolutely was," Lucas countered. Martha shook her head in wonder. "Well, I can see you are going to be a very interesting addition to Coolidge, Miss Osborne. This town could use more women who do not faint at the first sign of trouble." As the evening wore on, other boarders drifted into the dining room, drawn by the sound of conversation and the smell of Martha's cooking. Lucas found himself lingering far longer than he had intended, caught up in listening to Nora answer their questions and tell stories from her travels. She had a gift for narrative, painting vivid pictures with her words, and he noticed she had a sly sense of humor that caught people off guard and made them laugh. It was full dark by the time he finally took his leave, stepping out onto the boarding house porch under a sky thick with stars. To his surprise, Nora followed him out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool desert night. "Thank you again for your help today," she said quietly. "I know you did not have to escort me to town or introduce me around. It was kind. It was selfish," Lucas admitted. "I wanted to keep talking to you." The words hung between them in the darkness, more honest than he had intended. Nora was quiet for a moment, and he could not read her expression in the shadows. "I should tell you," she said finally, "that I am not looking for romance, Mr. Sterling. I have seen too many women lose themselves in marriage, give up their dreams and their freedom to become someone's wife. Teaching is important to me. Making a difference is important to me. I cannot afford distractions." The rejection should have stung, but her tone was so matter-of-fact, so clearly born from hard experience rather than lack of interest, that Lucas found himself respecting her position even as he regretted it. "I understand," he said, "but I would still like to be your friend if you will allow it. Coolidge can be a lonely place for newcomers, and you seem like someone worth knowing." He could hear the smile in her voice when she answered, "Friendship I can manage. Thank you, Lucas, for everything." The sound of his first name in her voice sent warmth through his chest. "Good night, Nora. Welcome to Coolidge." He walked home through the quiet streets, his mind full of storm-gray eyes and a voice that could calm chaos. His house was a small adobe structure on the eastern edge of town, nothing fancy but comfortable, with 2 rooms and a porch where he liked to sit in the evenings. It had been his parents' house before they died of influenza 3 winters back, and sometimes it felt too empty for just him. That night, he lay in bed and thought about Nora walking toward a stampede with her hands raised and her voice steady, thought about the way she had looked when she smiled, thought about her warning that she was not looking for romance. He should respect that, he knew. Should accept her friendship and be grateful for it. But Lucas had seen something in her eyes when they talked, a spark of connection that suggested he was not alone in feeling the pull between them. And if there was one thing he had learned from working with horses and cattle all his life, it was patience. Some things could not be rushed. Some things had to unfold in their own time. He could be patient. The next morning, Lucas woke with the sun and headed to the Triple Crown Ranch headquarters to give his report to the foreman, a grizzled veteran named Jack Morrison, who ran the operation with an iron fist and a surprisingly soft heart. Jack listened to Lucas's account of the previous day's near disaster with growing astonishment. "She walked right up to the Stampede," Jack repeated like he needed to hear it again to believe it. "Right up to it," Lucas confirmed. "I have never seen anything like it, Jack. 2,000 head, completely out of control, and she calmed them with singing and hand gestures. Pete and the others will tell you the same. Pete already did this morning when he came in. Half the crew is talking about nothing else. They are calling her an angel, a miracle worker." Jack shook his head. "I need to meet this woman, thank her properly. The Triple Crown owes her a debt." "She is the new schoolteacher," Lucas said, "staying at Martha Chen's boarding house. I am sure she will be around town." Jack's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "And I am sure you will make certain I have opportunities to run into her, since you seem so taken with our miracle worker." "I am not taken," Lucas protested, too quickly. "Son, I have known you since you were in short pants. You have that same look you got when you were 15 and decided you were going to break that wild Mustang everyone said was unbreakable. Determined and stubborn and already planning 3 steps ahead." Lucas could not quite suppress his smile. "She said she is not looking for romance." "Most of the best things in life are the ones we were not looking for," Jack said philosophically. "Just mind you do not push too hard. She sounds like the kind of woman who makes up her own mind about things." It was good advice, and Lucas tried to follow it over the next few weeks as Coolidge absorbed its new schoolteacher, and found her to be everything Mrs. Abernathy had hoped for and more. Nora threw herself into preparing for the school term that would begin in June, organizing the classroom, reviewing curriculum, and meeting with parents to discuss their children's needs and abilities. She was firm but fair, creative but practical, and within days the entire town had fallen a little bit in love with her. Lucas made good on his promise of friendship, stopping by the school several times a week with excuses to help with repairs or heavy lifting. They fell into an easy companionship, talking about everything and nothing, sharing meals at the boarding house or the small restaurant run by old Paulo Sanchez on the main street. Nora was unlike anyone Lucas had ever known, fiercely intelligent and independent, but also warm and surprisingly funny once she relaxed enough to let her guard down. He introduced her to everyone in town, watching with quiet pleasure as she won people over with her straightforward honesty and genuine interest in their lives. She spent hours with Mrs. Abernathy discussing educational philosophy, helped Paulo's daughter with her English, sat with the elderly widow Mrs. Patterson and listened to stories about the old days. She seemed to collect people the way some women collected china, finding value in everyone she met. But it was when Lucas took her out to the Triple Crown to meet Jack and see the ranch's operation that he truly understood the depth of her gift with animals. They rode out on a warm May morning, the desert alive with spring wildflowers and the air sweet with the smell of creosote after a brief rain. Jack greeted them at the ranch house, a sprawling structure that served as headquarters for the Triple Crown's vast operation. "Miss Osborne, it is an honor," Jack said, shaking her hand with genuine warmth. "Lucas has told me what you did, but I confess I am having trouble wrapping my mind around it. Would you be willing to give us a demonstration?" Nora looked surprised. "A demonstration?" "Nothing dangerous," Jack assured her, But we have a few young steers we are trying to gentle for pulling wagons, and they are proving stubborn. If you could show us your technique, teach us what you know, it would be invaluable." Lucas saw Nora's expression shift from surprise to interest. "I would be happy to help. I have told you before that I want to teach what I know, spread the skills. It does no good if only I can do it." They spent the rest of the morning in the training pen, with Nora demonstrating her methods to an audience of fascinated ranch hands. She explained the importance of voice tone and body language, how to read the subtle signals animals gave off, how to project calm and confidence even when you did not feel it. She had them practice the songs, simple wordless melodies that carried soothing tones, and showed them the hand movements that drew and held attention. Lucas watched her teach and felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than attraction. This was what Nora was meant to do, this sharing of knowledge and empowering of others. She glowed with purpose and passion, patient with mistakes, generous with praise, utterly in her element. One of the young steers, a nervous roan with a white face, was particularly skittish, shying away from anyone who approached. Nora spent 20 minutes with him, singing and moving her hands in those hypnotic patterns, and gradually the steer calmed, coming close enough to take an apple from her palm. The ranch hands broke into spontaneous applause, and Nora laughed with delight. "You see," she said, "it is not magic. It is patience and understanding and respect. Animals are not so different from people. They want to feel safe, to be treated with kindness. Give them that, and they will trust you." On the ride back to Coolidge that afternoon, Lucas found himself struggling with feelings that had grown too large to contain comfortably. He was falling in love with Nora Osborne, had been falling since the moment he saw her walk toward that stampede with her hands raised and her voice steady. But she had been clear about her priorities, her need to focus on her work and her independence. He did not want to ruin the friendship they had built by pushing for something she had already said she did not want. "You are quiet," Nora observed as they rode. "Is something wrong?" "Just thinking," Lucas said, which was true if incomplete. He should deflect, change the subject, but he had never been good at dishonesty. "About you, if I am being honest, about how remarkable you are." Nora was silent for a long moment. "Lucas, I know," he said quickly. "I know what you said about romance and distractions. I am not asking you to change your mind. I just wanted you to know that I see you, all of what you are, and I think you are extraordinary." The words hung in the air between them, earnest and unadorned. Nora's expression was complicated, something that might have been regret mixing with something that might have been longing. "I am not good at this," she said finally, "at letting people close. I spent so many years moving from place to place, never staying long enough to build real connections. And I saw what happened to my mother, the way she gave up everything for my father, how she lost herself in being his wife instead of her own person. I cannot do that." "I would never ask you to," Lucas said fiercely. "Nora, the things that make you extraordinary are your strength and your independence and your passion for teaching. I would not want you to give up any of that. I just want to be part of your life, whatever form that takes. Friend, companion, whatever you will allow." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, and he could see the war happening behind them, fear and hope battling it out. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly. "What if I cannot balance teaching and a relationship? What if I disappoint you?" "You could not," Lucas said simply. "But I understand fear. I lost my parents 3 years ago, and for a long time I could not imagine letting anyone else get that close again. The thought of losing someone else I cared about was paralyzing. But loneliness is its own kind of loss, and I think we are meant to take risks on the people who matter." They had reached the edge of Coolidge, the familiar buildings coming into view. Nora pulled her horse to a stop, and Lucas did the same, waiting while she gathered her thoughts. "I cannot promise you anything," she said at last. "I am still figuring out who I am and what I want my life to look like. But I would be lying if I said I did not feel something when we are together, something that scares me and excites me in equal measure." Hope flared bright in Lucas's chest. "That is enough, more than enough. We can figure out the rest as we go." Nora smiled then, tentative but real. "You are a patient man, Lucas Sterling." "When something matters, patience is easy," he replied. They rode into town together as the sun began its descent, and Lucas felt like the world had shifted slightly, everything falling into a new alignment that felt right in a way he could not quite name. They were not courting, not yet, but they were no longer just friends either. They were something in between, something undefined, and he found he was content with that uncertainty for now. June arrived with blazing heat and the start of the school term. Nora threw herself into teaching with the same passion she brought to everything else, and within days her students were completely devoted to her. She made learning an adventure, taking them outside to study plants and animals, using songs to teach multiplication tables, turning history into vivid stories that captured imaginations. Parents reported their children actually wanted to go to school, which was revolutionary for a town where most kids saw education as something to be endured before they could get to the real work of helping their families. Lucas found himself stopping by the school on his way to and from the ranch, timing his rides to coincide with the end of the school day so he could walk Nora back to the boarding house. She welcomed his presence without fanfare, falling into step beside him and sharing stories from her day, asking about his work, slowly letting him further into her life. One evening in mid-June, she surprised him by asking if he wanted to take a walk after dinner, away from the town and the curious eyes that tracked their every move. They headed east into the desert as the sun set, the heat of the day dissipating into the cool of evening. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels around them, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. "I got a letter from a school in Tucson today," Nora said as they walked, "offering me a position at twice the salary Coolidge pays, with better facilities and more resources." Lucas's heart dropped. "What did you tell them?" "I have not responded yet. I wanted to think about it." She paused, kicking at a small stone. "A month ago I would have accepted immediately. More money, a bigger city, better opportunities. But now..." "But now," Lucas prompted, hardly daring to hope. "Now I have students I care about. I have friends, a community that feels like home. I have you." She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "I know we have not defined what this is between us, but it matters to me, Lucas. You matter to me. And I do not want to lose that by running away to chase something that looks better on paper." Relief and joy surged through him in equal measure. "You are staying." "I am staying," Nora confirmed. "Coolidge is where I am meant to be. I can feel it. This is home." Lucas could not help himself. He pulled her into a hug, and after a moment's hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other while the desert sang its evening song around them, and Lucas thought he had never been happier in his entire life. "I am still scared," Nora admitted, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I am still not sure how to do this, how to be with someone without losing myself." "Then we will figure it out together," Lucas said. "No rules, no expectations, just us, taking it one day at a time." She pulled back enough to look up at him, and in the fading light her eyes were luminous. "That sounds good, really good." The kiss, when it came, was soft and sweet and tasted of new beginnings. Lucas cupped her face in his hands like she was something precious, and Nora made a small sound of contentment that went straight to his heart. They kissed until the stars came out overhead, until the desert cooled around them and reality intruded in the form of coyote calls getting closer. They walked back to town holding hands, not talking, not needing to. Something fundamental had shifted between them, a door opening that Lucas had almost feared would stay closed forever. When they reached the boarding house, Nora squeezed his hand and smiled. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Nora." He walked home feeling like he could fly, like his feet barely touched the ground. Behind him, he did not see Mrs. Chen watching from her window, a satisfied smile on her face. The boarding house owner had seen this coming weeks ago and was pleased to be proven right. The summer passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Lucas spent his days on the ranch, working cattle and mending fence, and doing all the 1,000 tasks that kept a large operation running. But his evenings belonged to Nora. They took long walks into the desert, exploring the landscape she was growing to love. They had dinner with Mrs. Chen and the other boarders, their easy affection causing more than a few knowing smiles. They attended church socials and town meetings, and gradually Coolidge began to think of them as a pair, Lucas and Nora, inevitable as sunrise. Jack Morrison invited them both to a barn dance the Triple Crown hosted in July, a massive affair that drew ranchers and townspeople from 50 miles around. Lucas had not been much for dancing before, but with Nora in his arms, swirling across the floor while a fiddle band played, he discovered a new appreciation for the activity. She laughed when he stepped on her toes, her face flushed with heat and happiness, and he thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. "I am falling in love with you," he told her as they danced, unable to keep the words inside any longer. Nora's steps faltered, but she did not pull away. "I know," she said quietly. "I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because love makes you vulnerable. Love gives someone the power to hurt you, to take away the things you care about most." She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "My mother loved my father so much she forgot to love herself, and when he died she just faded away like she had nothing left to live for. I cannot be that woman, Lucas. I cannot lose myself like that." Lucas pulled her closer, wanting to protect her from old hurts and new fears. "Love does not have to look like that. My parents, they loved each other fiercely, but they were still individuals. My mother ran her own business, my father had his work, and they supported each other's dreams instead of subsuming them. That is the kind of love I want, the kind where we make each other stronger instead of smaller." "How do you know we can have that?" Nora asked. "Because I see who you are, and I would never want to change it. Your teaching, your gift with animals, your independence, those are not things I want to take away. They are things I admire and respect and want to help flourish." He smiled down at her. "I do not want to own you, Nora. I just want to love you. There is a difference." She was quiet for a long moment, swaying with him to the music, and then she nodded. "Okay. Okay. Okay, I will try. I will take the risk." She smiled, tentative but genuine, "because you are right. What we have is too precious to throw away out of fear. And I think I would regret it for the rest of my life if I let you go without at least trying." Lucas kissed her right there on the dance floor in front of half the county, and he did not care who saw. Nora kissed him back with a fierceness that spoke of her own need, her own hunger for connection despite her fears. When they broke apart, the entire barn erupted in cheers and applause, and they both laughed, embarrassed and happy. August brought monsoon rains that turned the desert briefly green and filled the air with the smell of wet earth and creosote. The school was closed for the summer, but Nora kept busy with private tutoring sessions and planning for the next term. She spent more time at the Triple Crown, teaching the ranch hands her techniques for calming cattle and developing a reputation that spread far beyond Coolidge. Ranchers from neighboring spreads started showing up asking for her help, and she took on several consulting projects that supplemented her teacher's salary nicely. "You could make a real business out of this," Lucas told her one afternoon as they sat on his porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the desert. "Travel to ranches, teach your methods, charge good money for it. You have knowledge that is valuable." Nora considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. "I have thought about it, but teaching school is important to me too. Those children need education, need someone who believes in them." "What if you did both?" Lucas suggested. "Teach during the school year, consult during the summers and on weekends. Best of both worlds." "That is a lot of work," Nora said, but he could see the idea taking root in her mind. "You are not afraid of work, and I would help however I could. Drive you to ranches, help with demonstrations, whatever you needed." She looked at him with such warmth that his breath caught. "You really mean that, do not you? You genuinely want to help me succeed?" "Of course I do. Your success is not a threat to me, Nora. It is something to celebrate." She leaned over and kissed him, slow and deep, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on. They stayed like that as the rain pounded down around them, creating a silver curtain that shut out the world and left just the two of them in their own perfect bubble. By September, their relationship had settled into something comfortable and right. They were officially courting, which meant Sunday dinners with Mrs. Abernathy and her family, proper chaperoned evenings, and Lucas asking permission to call on her like they were characters in one of the novels Nora liked to read. It was old-fashioned and slightly ridiculous, but it also felt right, a public acknowledgement of their commitment to each other. The school year started again, and Lucas watched Nora bloom in her element, saw the way she poured love and attention into her students and received it back tenfold. She had found her place in Coolidge, had built a life that mattered, and he was honored to be part of it. On a cool October evening, as they walked back from a town meeting where Nora had successfully argued for more funding for school supplies, Lucas found himself thinking about the future in concrete terms for the first time. He wanted to marry her, wanted to build a life together, but he was not sure how she would respond to the idea. Marriage had been the thing she feared most, the trap she had spent years avoiding. "You are thinking very loudly," Nora observed, squeezing his hand. "What is on your mind?" "The future," Lucas admitted. "Our future specifically." Nora's steps slowed. "What about it?" "I want to marry you," he said, deciding honesty was the best approach. "Not now, not yet, but someday. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to support your dreams and build a life together. But I know marriage is complicated for you, and I do not want to push." Nora was quiet for a long time, long enough that Lucas started to worry he had said too much, moved too fast. But then she spoke, her voice thoughtful. "I have been thinking about that too, about what marriage could look like for us. And I realized something important. My fear was never really about marriage itself. It was about losing my identity, my purpose, my independence. But I do not think I would lose those things with you. I think I would keep them and gain something wonderful too." Hope sparked in Lucas's chest. "Does that mean you would consider it, eventually?" "Eventually, yes." She smiled up at him. "Not today, not tomorrow, but when we are both ready, when the time is right, yes." "I want to marry you, Lucas Sterling. I want to build a life together. I want all of it." Lucas pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly, not caring that they were in the middle of Main Street where anyone could see. Nora kissed him back with equal fervor, and somewhere nearby someone whistled appreciatively. They broke apart laughing, foreheads pressed together, breathing hard. "I love you," Lucas said. "I love you too," Nora replied, and it was the first time she had said the words without qualification or fear. So very much. The rest of the year passed in a haze of happiness. They spent Thanksgiving with Jack Morrison and his family at the Triple Crown, a massive feast that included half the ranch hands and their families. Christmas was celebrated with the whole town, a community celebration in the schoolhouse with Nora's students performing a pageant she had written. Lucas gave her books, beautiful leather-bound volumes on animal husbandry and education theory that she had mentioned wanting, and she gave him a set of hand-tooled saddlebags with his initials carved into the leather. As winter gave way to spring of 1888, Lucas knew the time had come. He had been carrying his grandmother's ring in his pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. It came on an unseasonably warm day in March, when he and Nora rode out to the site where she had stopped the Stampede nearly a year before. They stood at the mouth of the canyon, looking out at the peaceful rangeland where cattle grazed contentedly. It was hard to believe this quiet place had been the scene of such chaos, such danger. "This is where everything changed," Nora said softly. "This is where I met you." "This is where I saw the woman I would fall in love with," Lucas agreed. "Watching you walk toward that stampede, fearless and determined, I knew you were someone special. I just did not know how special yet." He pulled the ring from his pocket and dropped to one knee. Nora's eyes went wide, her hands flying to her mouth. "Nora Osborne, you are the bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You challenge me and inspire me and make me want to be a better man. I promise to support your dreams, to celebrate your independence, to be your partner in every sense of the word. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Nora's face, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Nora pulled him to his feet and kissed him with a passion that left them both breathless. "I am still scared," she admitted when they broke apart, "but I am more scared of losing you than I am of taking this leap. We will jump together," Lucas promised. "Always together." They were married in May in the schoolhouse Nora loved so much, with the whole town in attendance. Mrs. Abernathy cried through the entire ceremony. Martha Chen provided the food for the reception, a feast that lasted well into the night. Nora wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her dark hair, and Lucas thought she had never looked more beautiful. Jack Morrison served as Lucas's best man, and gave a speech that was equal parts heartfelt and embarrassing, recounting stories from Lucas's childhood that made everyone laugh. Mrs. Chen stood up for Nora, and her speech was brief but touching, welcoming Nora into the community as both teacher and daughter. They honeymooned at the Triple Crown, spending a week in a small cabin on the far edge of the ranch property, away from prying eyes and curious questions. They rode through the desert at dawn and dusk, made love in the cool darkness of the cabin, talked about their hopes and dreams for the future. It was perfect. When they returned to Coolidge, they moved into Lucas's house, which Nora immediately began transforming into a home. She added curtains and rugs, filled shelves with books, planted a garden in the small yard. Lucas watched her nest with a contentment that went bone deep. This was what he had always wanted without quite knowing it, this sense of partnership and belonging. The summer of 1888 was busy. Nora consulted with ranches throughout the territory, building a reputation as the woman who could calm the wildest cattle. Lucas accompanied her on most of these trips, serving as her assistant and protector, though Nora insisted she needed neither. They made a good team, and the work was satisfying in ways that went beyond the money they earned. In August, Nora fainted during a particularly hot consultation at a ranch near Phoenix. Lucas caught her before she hit the ground, his heart in his throat with fear. The ranch owner's wife, a practical woman who had birthed 7 children, took one look at Nora and smiled knowingly. "Your wife is pregnant," she announced, and Lucas's world tilted on its axis. They returned to Coolidge immediately, and the local doctor confirmed what the ranch wife had suspected. Nora was about 3 months along, which meant the baby would arrive in early spring. Lucas was thrilled, but Nora was more conflicted. "I am happy," she insisted as they sat on their porch that evening. "I am, but I am also scared. What if I cannot be a good mother? What if pregnancy and a baby mean I have to give up teaching?" "You do not have to give up anything," Lucas assured her. "We will figure it out. Martha has already offered to help with childcare. Mrs. Abernathy said half the mothers in town would line up to watch a baby if it meant you could keep teaching. You do not have to do this alone, Nora." "I just do not want to lose myself," she said quietly. "Do not want to become just a mother instead of Nora." Lucas took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "You are Nora always. Wife, mother, teacher, horse whisperer, you are all of those things and more. Having a child does not erase the rest of who you are, it just adds to it." Gradually, Nora's fear gave way to excitement. She read every book on pregnancy and childbirth she could find, drove the doctor crazy with questions, continued teaching right up until the Christmas break, despite her growing belly making it difficult to move around the classroom. Her students were fascinated by the changes in their teacher's body, and Nora turned it into an extended lesson on biology and the miracle of life that was both educational and age-appropriate. Winter was mild that year, for which Nora was grateful as her pregnancy advanced. She spent January preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes, setting up a cradle in their bedroom, accepting gifts from the community that had fully embraced them both. Lucas was constantly amazed by her strength and resilience. Even in the final, uncomfortable weeks, she remained active and engaged, planning lessons for after the baby arrived and consulting with ranchers by letter. Their son was born on a cool morning in March of 1889, arriving 2 weeks earlier than expected with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Lucas held Nora's hand through the whole ordeal, awed and terrified by the strength it took for her to bring their child into the world. When the doctor placed the squalling infant in Nora's arms, Lucas watched his wife transform again, a new facet of her revealing itself. "Matthew," she said softly, looking down at their son with wonder. "His name is Matthew." Matthew Sterling proved to be a healthy, loud baby with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. He fit into their lives with surprising ease, sleeping in a basket beside Nora's desk when she returned to teaching after 6 weeks, cared for by a rotating cast of volunteer mothers when Nora needed to focus fully on her students. The town rallied around them, proving that it took a village not just to raise a child, but to support the parents raising him. Lucas found that fatherhood suited him. He loved coming home to the sound of Matthew's babbling, loved watching Nora sing their son to sleep with the same voice she used to calm cattle, loved the way their little family fit together like pieces of a puzzle. They were busy, sometimes overwhelmingly so, but they were happy. The years flowed by in the way years do when life is full and meaningful. Matthew grew from baby to toddler to little boy, curious and bright and kind-hearted. Nora continued teaching, her reputation as the best educator in the territory, bringing families to Coolidge specifically so their children could learn from her. Her consulting work expanded as well, and she published a series of articles in ranching journals about her techniques that brought her national attention. In 1892, Their daughter was born, a tiny, fierce thing they named Lily, who had her father's temperament and her mother's determination. Matthew, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly trying to help in ways that were more hindrance than assistance but deeply sweet. Lucas had advanced to foreman of the Triple Crown after Jack Morrison retired in 1890, a promotion that came with more responsibility and better pay. He loved the work, loved managing the ranch's operations and training the younger hands. He implemented many of Nora's techniques with the cattle herds, reducing losses from stampedes and making the Triple Crown one of the most efficiently run ranches in Arizona. Their house expanded too, with Lucas adding rooms to accommodate their growing family. They built a library for Nora's ever-expanding collection of books, a playroom for the children, a proper dining room for the family dinners that were sacred time in their household. The house became the heart of Coolidge's social life, always open to friends and neighbors, a place where people gathered to share news and food and laughter. In 1894, when Matthew was 5 and Lily 2, Nora was offered a position as the superintendent of schools for the entire county, overseeing education in 6 different towns. It was a huge opportunity, a chance to influence education on a much larger scale. Lucas encouraged her to take it, and together they worked out the logistics. Nora hired an assistant teacher for Coolidge, a young woman fresh from a teaching college back east who was eager to learn from the legendary Miss Osborne. Nora continued teaching part-time while taking on her new administrative duties, traveling to the different schools under her jurisdiction, implementing new programs, and fighting tirelessly for better resources and pay for teachers. Lucas supported her in every way he could, taking on more of the child care, organizing his work schedule to be home when Nora needed to travel, never once complaining about the demands her career placed on their family. He was proud of her accomplishments, proud to be married to a woman who was changing education throughout the territory. They faced challenges, of course. There were times when the juggling act of careers and children and marriage felt overwhelming. There were arguments about priorities and time management and who forgot to do what. But they always talked through their problems, always remembered they were on the same team, always chose each other at the end of the day. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1898, Lucas took Nora back to the canyon where it had all begun. Their children were with Martha Chen for the weekend, giving them rare time alone together. They stood at the mouth of the canyon as the sun set, casting long shadows across the peaceful rangeland. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked, taking her hand. "Taking the risk, marrying me, building this life?" Nora looked at him with those storm-gray eyes that still had the power to steal his breath. "Not for a single moment. You kept your promise, Lucas. You made me stronger, not smaller. You supported my dreams and helped me achieve things I never could have alone. Our life together has been the greatest adventure of my existence." Even with all the chaos, Lucas teased, the late nights and early mornings and children who refused to sleep. "Especially with all the chaos," Nora said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to live. I just needed you to help me see that I could have everything, that I did not have to choose between independence and love. You gave me permission to want it all." Lucas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I love you, Nora Sterling, more today than the day I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than today." "I love you too," Nora murmured. "My patient cowboy who watched me calm a stampede and decided I was worth the wait." They stood there as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, and Lucas thought about the improbable chain of events that had brought them to this moment. A stampede that could have killed dozens. A woman brave enough to walk toward danger instead of away from it. a connection that had grown from admiration to friendship to love. It all seemed impossible and yet completely inevitable at the same time. As the years continued to pass, their family and their love only deepened. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his mother's gift with animals and his father's steady temperament. He started working at the Triple Crown at 14, learning the ranching business from the ground up. Lily was fierce and brilliant, determined to be a doctor, spending her free time shadowing the local physician and reading every medical text she could get her hands on. In 1905, when Matthew was 16 and Lily 13, Nora surprised everyone by announcing she was pregnant again. At 39, she had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but their youngest son James arrived that fall, a happy accident that completed their family in ways they had not known it needed completing. Lucas, now 44, found himself a father to a newborn again, and discovered he had just as much capacity for midnight feedings and diaper changes as he had 18 years earlier. Matthew and Lily doted on their baby brother, and James grew up surrounded by love and attention from his entire family. The new century brought changes to Coolidge and to the territory. Arizona was moving toward statehood, though it would be years yet before that happened. The railroad expanded, bringing more people and more commerce. The wild lawlessness of the Old West was fading into memory, replaced by schools and churches and proper law enforcement. Coolidge grew from a small ranching town into a proper community with a bank and a newspaper and a hotel that could host traveling businessmen. Through it all, Lucas and Nora remained constants in the town's life. Nora eventually stepped down as county superintendent in 1910 to focus on writing, publishing a book about her animal calming techniques that became required reading in agricultural colleges across the country. She continued to teach, though now it was mostly advanced classes for older students and private tutoring for those who needed extra help. Lucas became part owner of the Triple Crown in 1908 when the original owners decided to sell, partnering with two other longtime employees to keep the ranch in the hands of people who loved it. Under their management, the ranch continued to thrive, adapting to changing markets and new technologies while maintaining the best traditions of Western ranching. Their children grew and flourished. Matthew married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread in 1909 and took over day-to-day management of a section of the Triple Crown, building his own house on the property and starting his own family. Lily fulfilled her dream of becoming a doctor, attending medical school in California and returning to Coolidge to set up the town's first proper medical practice in 1915. James, the surprise baby, proved to have his mother's gift for teaching, following in her footsteps to become an educator. As Lucas and Nora moved into their 50s, they found themselves with time to enjoy the life they had built. They took long rides into the desert, revisiting all the places that held meaning for them. They hosted Sunday dinners that brought together 3 generations of family and friends. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands like they had when they were young and everything was new. "We did all right, did not we?" Nora said one evening in 1920, as they celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. "Better than all right," Lucas replied, pressing a kiss to her silver-streaked hair. "We did magnificently." And they had. They had built a life based on mutual respect and support, on love that allowed for independence and partnership in equal measure. They had raised children who were kind and capable and making their own marks on the world. They had contributed to their community in meaningful ways, leaving Coolidge better than they found it. Most importantly, They had proven that love did not require sacrifice of self, that two people could be stronger together than apart without either losing who they were. As Lucas looked around at the gathered family, at the children and grandchildren who carried forward the values he and Nora had instilled, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was the legacy that mattered, not wealth or fame or power, but love and family and community. This was what he had seen in Nora all those years ago when she walked toward a stampede with nothing but her voice and steady hands to protect her. The courage to face fear, the strength to stay calm in chaos, the wisdom to know what truly mattered. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked, reading his expression the way she always could. "About the day we met," Lucas said. "About how lucky I was that you happened to be riding past when that stampede started." Nora smiled, that same small quirk of her lips she had given him the first time, now etched with the lines of a life well lived. "Luck had nothing to do with it. We were meant to find each other. Some things are just destiny." "Destiny," Lucas repeated, liking the sound of it. "I can accept that." Their grandchildren pulled them back into the celebration then, demanding stories from the old days and treats from the kitchen. Lucas and Nora obliged, falling into the familiar rhythms of family life, the ebb and flow of conversation and laughter that filled their home and their hearts. Years continued to pass in the way they do, bringing joy and sorrow in equal measure. They buried friends and celebrated births, watched Coolidge continue to grow and change, saw Arizona finally achieve statehood in 1912. Through it all, they remained each other's constant, the steady presence that made everything else possible. In 1925, as they approached 40 years of marriage, Nora fell ill with pneumonia. It was a frightening few weeks, with Lucas barely leaving her bedside, holding her hand through the fever and the struggle to breathe. But Nora was strong, had always been strong, and she fought her way back to health with the same determination she brought to everything else. When she was finally out of danger, Lucas wept with relief, holding her frail frame and thanking God for not taking her yet. "I am not going anywhere," Nora assured him, her voice still weak but fierce. "We have too much left to do together." And they did. They lived to see all their children married and established in their own lives. They welcomed a dozen grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren before the end. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1938 with a party that brought together the entire town, everyone wanting to honor the couple who had contributed so much to Coolidge over the decades. Nora's book went through multiple printings, influencing generations of ranchers and animal handlers. The techniques she pioneered became standard practice across the West, reducing deaths from stampedes and improving animal welfare throughout the industry. Her impact on education was equally profound, with many of her former students going on to become teachers themselves, spreading her philosophy of respect for children's individual needs and learning styles. Lucas lived to see the Triple Crown become one of the most successful ranches in Arizona, a model of progressive management and ethical treatment of both animals and workers. The techniques Nora had taught him, and that he had implemented, became industry standard, and the ranch was frequently used as a teaching facility for agricultural students. On a warm spring evening in 1945, Lucas and Nora sat on their porch as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. They were both in their 80s now, bodies worn from lives of hard work but spirits still strong. Around them, the desert bloomed with wildflowers, just as it had that first spring when they met. 57 years, Nora said softly. "Can you believe it has been 57 years since I walked toward that stampede? Best decision I ever made was watching you instead of running away," Lucas replied. Nora laughed, the sound still rich despite her age. You thought I was insane. Completely insane, Lucas agreed. But also magnificent. You are still magnificent, Nora. You have always been the bravest person I know. It was not bravery, Nora said, leaning her head on his shoulder. It was love. I loved those cattle, loved the land, loved the work, loved the challenge. And then I loved you. Love makes you brave because you have something worth fighting for. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had watched them fall in love all those decades ago. 3 generations of their family were scattered throughout Coolidge and beyond, living lives shaped by the values Lucas and Nora had instilled. The town they had helped build continued to thrive, a testament to community and cooperation and the power of people working together. No regrets? Lucas asked, the same question he had asked on their 10th anniversary and every anniversary since. Not a single one, Nora replied, the same answer she always gave because it was true. None, Lucas said firmly. This life we built, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I dreamed possible. You gave me that, Nora. You and your courage and your willingness to take a risk on a simple cowboy who fell in love with you the moment he saw you walk toward danger without flinching. You were never simple, Nora corrected. You were patient and kind and steady as stone. You were exactly what I needed, even though I did not know I needed it. You taught me that love does not have to be a cage, that partnership can mean freedom. That was your gift to me. They kissed then, a gentle brush of lips that held the weight of nearly 6 decades of love and partnership, and choosing each other every single day. When they pulled apart, both were smiling, content in a way that only comes from a life fully lived with someone you love. Lucas and Nora Sterling remained in Coolidge for the rest of their days, fixtures in the community they had helped shape, living proof that love could be strong enough to weather any storm while still allowing 2 people to be fully themselves. Their story became legend in the town, passed down through generations. The cowboy who fell in love with the woman who calmed a stampede with nothing but her voice and steady hands. And when they finally passed, within months of each other in their late 80s, the entire town mourned. They were buried side by side in the Coolidge Cemetery, under a headstone that read simply, "Together in life, together in death, together always." But their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their values forward. In the students, Nora had taught who became teachers themselves. In the ranch hands, Lucas had trained who passed on his techniques. In the town of Coolidge itself, which remained a place where community mattered, where independence and partnership were equally valued, where people looked out for one another and worked together to build something lasting. The house Lucas had built and Nora had made a home stood for generations, eventually becoming a historical landmark, preserved as an example of pioneer life in Arizona. Visitors walked through the rooms where a family had been raised, where love had flourished, where 2 people had proven that you could have everything: career and family, independence and partnership, individual dreams and shared life if you were brave enough to try and fortunate enough to find the right person to try with. And sometimes, on quiet spring evenings when the desert bloomed with wildflowers, people swore they could hear singing carried on the wind, a rich voice that seemed to soothe the very air itself. The old-timers would smile and say it was just Nora, still singing to the cattle, still calming stampedes, still working her magic on a land she had loved, and a life she had lived fully and without regret. The story of Lucas and Nora Sterling became more than just a tale of romance. It became a reminder that the best love stories are not about one person completing another, but about two complete people choosing to build something together that neither could have created alone. It was about respect and support, and the courage to be vulnerable. About patience and passion in equal measure. About a cowboy who watched a woman do the impossible and saw not someone to rescue but someone to admire, and a woman who learned that love could make her stronger instead of weaker. Their life together had not been perfect. There had been arguments and challenges, difficulties and disappointments. But they had faced everything side by side, partners in the truest sense of the word. They had built something that lasted not just their lifetime but generations beyond, a legacy of love and courage and choosing each other every single day. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, though those had their place, but the daily choice to show up, to support, to love even when it was hard. The steady commitment that weathered storms and celebrated sunshine in equal measure. The deep knowledge that you had found your person, the one who made you better without making you less, who challenged you to grow while loving exactly who you were. Lucas Sterling had watched Nora Osborne calm a stampede with nothing but her voice and steady hands, and in that moment, he had seen his future. He had chosen patience over pressure, friendship over force, partnership over possession. And Nora had chosen courage over fear, taking the risk of opening her heart to love even though it terrified her. Together, they had built a life that was rich and full and meaningful. They had loved deeply and lived fully. They had made mistakes and learned from them. They had raised children who carried forward their values. They had contributed to their community in ways both large and small. They had proven that the best kind of love was the kind that made both people better, stronger, more fully themselves. And in the end, when their time on earth was done and they returned to the dust from which they came, they left behind something immortal, the memory of a love that had been tested and proven true, a partnership that had weathered every storm, a story that reminded everyone who heard it that real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that matters, was not about possession or perfection, but about respect and support and choosing each other every single day, stampedes and all.